Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Akash Paun. I'm delighted to be chairing today's event in conversation with Rebecca Evans, who I will introduce in a few moments. This is the fourth in the Institute for Government's Elections 2021 event series, and it follows similar events that we've held over the past couple of months with the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross, Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price, and Mayor of Greater Manchester Andy Burnham. And the recordings of all those events are on our website and podcast channel. We also have events coming up shortly with Welsh Conservative leader Andrew R.T. Davies and SNP Constitution Secretary Mike Russell. So please do look out for those as well. But today I am very pleased to welcome Rebecca Evans, who is Minister for Finance in the Welsh Government and Trefnydd of the Senedd, and the latter post is an approximate equivalent of the Leader of the House in Westminster terms. And I ask the Welsh speakers among you to forgive my pronunciation, which I'm sure was terrible. Rebecca is also a member of the Senedd for Gower, and she has previously held various other ministerial portfolios, including for housing, public health and farming. And before first entering the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, in 2011, Rebecca worked as a policy manager for a disability charity. So over the next 45 minutes or so, I will be asking Rebecca a series of questions about Welsh devolution, about the election that's taking place in 6 weeks' time from today, about the State of the Union and the relationship between Cardiff and Westminster. If you in the audience have any questions for Rebecca, please just stick them in the chat function on Microsoft Teams. And I mean, if you don't mind, say who you are as well. If you want to join the conversation on Twitter, the IFG Events account will be tweeting using the hashtags IFGDevo and Elections 2021. So Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And very good pronunciation. I'm very impressed.
Oh, I'm very pleased to hear that. Thanks very much. Okay, great. So I'd like to start by talking a bit about the election. So yeah, as mentioned, polling day is 6 weeks from today, May the 6th, or at least it should be. I just wanted to start by asking you to confirm that the elections are definitely going to be going ahead, because until recently there was quite a lot of speculation that they might have to be postponed due to coronavirus.
No, I'm very happy to confirm that the election will be going ahead as planned on the 6th of May. We did introduce some legislation in the Senedd to allow our Llywydd, who is the presiding officer, to postpone the election if needed on public health grounds. But we now know that the situation isn't, on that end of the spectrum, and that we are able to run that election safely, and very much looking forward to it.
Okay, well that's good to hear. And so this will be an election, though, that's it's going to be taking place still in the context of coronavirus. I mean, how different is it going to be, do you think, for voters and also, I suppose, for political parties as an election?
I think this election is completely different from any that we've had previously in a number of ways. Firstly, campaigning is so different. Under normal circumstances, we would have been out knocking doors Saturdays and Sundays and a couple of nights a week since probably last September. But of course, we haven't been able to do any of that. So we're relying as campaigners lots on telephone canvassing, on leafleting, lots of social media work, for example. So in that sense, it's very different. You don't have that personal interaction with voters in the way that you would really like to, but unfortunately the public health situation just hasn't allowed that kind of campaigning to take place. But that said, I think that the kind of issues that people are going to be caring about in this election are probably different to previous elections. People will, I'm sure, be judging the Welsh Government on its performance in terms of handling the pandemic, and then also considering what the various parties are offering in terms of their vision for the recovery as we move out of the pandemic. And we're certainly very focused on a recovery that doesn't leave anyone behind in Wales, that's green and fair, and that seeks to repair the damage that has been done to young people's lives, and also ensure that our NHS is in good shape for the future.
Yeah, so I did exactly want to go on to what you see as the key issues at stake, and you've given an indication of that. So I suppose just building on that, what do you see as what are the big dividing lines then at this election between Welsh Labour and the main opposition parties?
I think that we've seen Welsh Labour being really responsible over the course of the Senedd, but particularly so in terms of our response to the pandemic. So I think what you'll see in Welsh Labour's manifesto is very much one which is costed and deliverable, whereas I know it's temptation for other parties who perhaps don't believe that they necessarily will be in a position to be delivering on their promises to promise people the world. And so that can be more challenging, I think, if you are a party which is in government and which is fighting to be in government the other side of the election. I think that our approach to recovery for the NHS will be really important in terms of how much focus different parties are going to be willing to put on public services, how much investment we're willing to put into the NHS, but then also looking at young people who have been, particularly badly hit by the pandemic. What more can we be doing to support their mental health? What more can we be doing to ensure that they all achieve their potential? So one of the things I'm really proud of is our guarantee to all young people under the age of 25 that we will provide them with an offer of training, education, employment, or support to get themselves into self-employment. So I think the relative focus that different parties put on these challenges will be really interesting as the manifestos get published in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, and we'll be looking out with interest to see the manifestos, of course. OK, so I don't want to get too much into speculation about the results. I mean, as mentioned, obviously, you'll be hoping to be back in government after May the 6th. Labour's been in government in Cardiff throughout the 21 years of devolution, and opinion polls suggest you're probably going to be the largest party again, but possibly falling short of your current position, and certainly probably short of an overall majority. There was a recent poll that suggested Labour might be on course for just 22 out of 60 seats in the Senedd. I mean, obviously that's just one poll and so on. But if we end up in that kind of a scenario where Labour doesn't have the numbers to form a majority by itself, what would you like to see happen in terms of government formation? Would you be, and are you already thinking about the potential of going into coalition with Plaid, with whom Labour did govern together for 4 years some time ago, or would you prefer to govern as a minority and kind of do deals along the way on a bill by bill basis? What's your preference?
I think, and you'll expect me to say this, that it's probably too premature to be having those particular kind of discussions, because obviously 6 weeks out from polling day, all parties are focused on winning a majority, and that's very much what our mind is set on at the moment. But as you say, there has been a very difficult poll for Welsh Labour recently, putting us at that level of 22 seats. But I don't think it necessarily takes into account all of the local issues which are at play in Senedd elections particularly. Many of our seats are very closely fought. My own majority is 1900. By Westminster standards, that would be quite small, but actually it's not too bad in Senedd standards, because some of our seats actually are held by only a couple of hundred votes. So every vote very much does count in Senedd elections. So I don't want to speculate as to what might happen afterwards, and I know that that you understand that, but I probably wouldn't go any further than that today.
Yeah, no, understood. OK, that's fine. Well, I mean, we had, as mentioned earlier, Adam Price, the leader of Plaid, doing a similar event recently, and I know he said at that event, and he said in other contexts as well, that Plaid would only be interested in a coalition with Labour if it was a sort of equal partnership rather than a senior junior partner kind of arrangement. But I take it that you're not starting to strategize about that based on your previous answer about how anything like that could work.
At the moment, obviously, we're very much focused on seeking to gain a Labour majority because we think that Labour has done a good job in terms of managing the pandemic, and now we just need the tools to be able to finish the job in terms of taking us through to that green and fair recovery that we all want to see. Sorry, I can't give you any more.
No, it's entirely understandable. Yes, I mean, election comes first, obviously, from your perspective. Okay, I mean, one other question about the opinion polls then, not specifically about voting intention, but rather about, well, the future of the union, which I want to get on to discussing with you in the next part of this conversation. But there's been a few polls recently over the last year or so, I would say, that have suggested there's been a bit of a rise in support for Welsh Independence. One poll recently had support at nearly 40%, I think, which obviously that's below, the kind of position we're talking about in Scotland, but historically that's sort of well above the normal position or the historic position in Wales. So what do you think is the reason for that trend, and as a unionist, does it worry you?
I think it's undeniable that there has been an increase in interest in the idea of independence in recent months, and probably over the course of the last year or two. For me, though, I understand that the vast majority of people are still within that kind of spectrum of being in favour of devolution or even more devolution, rather than being at the harder end of seeking independence or the harder end of abolishing the Senedd. So I think the mainstream is very much in support of devolution, potentially with the increase of further devolution to the Senedd. I'm particularly interested in what more we can do in terms of devolving responsibility for rail to the Senedd. We've had historic shocking underinvestment on the part of the UK government in terms of rail, so that would be an area that I would be particularly interested in seeing what more we could do in that area. I mean, what's fueling the interest in independence? I wonder if it is just a feeling of anger potentially, or disappointment at the UK government because people don't feel heard, and they feel that the UK government is actually seeking to roll back devolution, and we've got plenty of evidence of that. So I think that might be the kind of thing which is fueling the increase in interest at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so obviously the Welsh government is in favour of the union, but also for several years has made the case for substantial constitutional reform of various kinds, and you started to touch upon that. The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, your party leader, was recently quoted, in fact, as saying that the UK as it is over. Do you know, what did he mean by that exactly? It was quite a dramatic way of putting it.
I think that he was trying to convey that the future of the union is going to look different regardless of what happens, and irrespective of all the questions relating to what may or may not be decided by the people of Scotland in due course. I think that there have to be new relationships now. We've left the European Union, we've got new challenges to deal with, we've got entrenched and settled devolution now, although clearly we want to go further in that regard. So there's an important point really to stand back, look at the intergovernmental relations, how are they working, what more can be done to improve them. As you say, there have been long calls for a proper look at this. I think Carwyn Jones, the former First Minister, has been calling for a constitutional convention probably since he was a young boy. I think it feels he's been saying it for so long. But yeah, there's definitely room, I think, now to start improving on the intergovernmental relations. From my perspective and a Finance Minister perspective, I think that there is a great deal more that we can do to improve things in terms of relations between the devolved administrations and the UK government, particularly in terms of dispute resolution, for example. example. We've got the statement of funding policy, we've got the fiscal framework, but occasionally the UK government takes decisions which are well outside of those things. And there's no current way for us to challenge that. There's no independent board or independent arbiter who can take a look at our grievances. And so essentially, all we can do is escalate things to the Joint Ministerial Council, where the UK government is judge and jury. So that is something which is very much lacking, I think, in terms of our intergovernmental relations and the kind of machinery which underpins all of that. So I think what Mark Drakeford was saying is that things will look different in future, but how they look, I think, isn't yet clear.
Okay, yeah, well, so the intergovernmental relations side, I do want to come on to that in a moment, because there were some quite interesting announcements on that front just yesterday, actually. But before we come to that, I just want to talk about a couple of sort of specific areas where there have been proposals over the years for particular changes or further devolution of powers to Cardiff. So you're the Minister for Finance, of course. Are you in favour of setting aside the kind of, how the machinery runs and the dispute resolution and so on, but are you in favour of reform of how Welsh government is funded? For example, would you like to take on further tax powers? Would you like there to be a reform or replacement of the Barnett formula, which is something, quick advert, the Institute for Government recently published a report on? What would be your ideal model?
Well, several things there. I think that in the longer term, we would be looking for reform of the Barnett formula to something which is more needs-based. But I think that is a big longer-term piece of work. In the short term, I think there are things that we need quite urgently, and which we've been pressing the UK government to deliver. One of which is more flexibility in terms of access to the Wales Reserve, for example. Now that sits at only £350 million, and in any one year we're only able to draw down 125 million revenue and 50 million capital, which is, it's very small when you're talking about a £20 billion budget. So more access to the Wales Reserve, more access to carry funding across financial years. 350 million, as I say, is very small, especially in a year such as the one we've just had in terms of the additional funding which has come to Welsh Government. And then also greater borrowing powers. So at the moment we're able to borrow up to £125 million, up to an aggregate of £1 billion. So that doesn't necessarily meet the needs, especially with the recent decisions that the UK government has taken in respect of capital funding and what they're intending to do in terms of bypassing devolved administrations through the Level and Up Fund, for example. So lots more that we could be doing in that area. And then the third point you raised was additional tax raising powers. So under the Wales Act, there is a process that the Welsh Government has to undertake in order to seek the further devolution of tax raising powers. And we've been testing that out now for the last couple of years, and it's proven to be woefully inadequate and completely not fit for purpose. So essentially Welsh Government has been seeking to devolve power to raise tax in the area of vacant land. So this is not a controversial area, it's relatively simple. We chose that specifically because it felt like a smoother kind of approach which we could take to test the mechanism to devolve further taxes. But even after 2 years of quite intensive work, we haven't got anywhere with the UK government, and we've literally gone a full circle back to the start where they're asking us for the kind of information that we've already provided. And I think that this is just it's political in the sense that the UK government doesn't want to devolve any further taxes to us, so is going to ensure that the system which is set in place to do so doesn't work. So we've had lots of discussions about what taxes might be devolved in future. We've looked at potentially what we could do in the area of social care, for example, but ultimately if we can't get the UK government to work with us, it's going to be very difficult to deliver some of these things.
Okay, yeah, no, that's an interesting set of issues that we don't have time to delve into all of them in great detail. I mean, I suppose the UK government Treasury perspective on this is presumably something like, you as a government are asking for these additional flexibilities, borrowing powers, ability to move money between years, tax raising powers, and so on. But they have a responsibility for the overall fiscal position, the level of debt, the level of public spending, and so on across the whole UK. And also the argument would be that through the Barnett formula, etc., Wales is relatively generously funded compared to England, certainly. I mean, I think it's around 23% higher public spending in Wales than in England on devolved matters like health and education and so on. So do you not feel that overall you may face some frustrations in terms of the rules you have to operate within, but overall, doesn't the system quite generously fund Wales and you as a government?
I think that some of the things that we're asking for don't even involve more money. It's just about giving us the tools that we need to manage the money that we have better. So those arguments about having greater access to the Wales Reserve, being able to carry more over in financial years, I think very much speak to just allowing us to use what we have better. And again, the same with borrowing powers. That doesn't cost UK government any more to give us greater borrowing powers and more flexibility there. So we can look at all of these various aspects. And I think the point really is, though, that the UK government, and I do have some sympathy with the argument that you make, which would be made from a Treasury perspective, but we're not just another UK government department. This is the point that I think the UK government fails to see, and Treasury fails to see particularly, is that we are a devolved government alongside the other devolved administrations, and then we have different responsibilities and needs as compared to just another UK government department. And I think that's where some of this ends up sticking, really.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, absolutely. I take your point on that. And in terms of potential sort of long-term reform in this area, reform of the Barnett formula and so on, in our recent report on this subject, one of the things we suggested could be a good first step towards maybe more fundamental reform would be to conduct a proper assessment of the spending needs of each part of the UK, which is something that the Treasury has previously done prior to devolution. It did it on at least 2 occasions, but politically it's quite a difficult area for UK government to enter into, in part because that would probably show that Scotland in particular gets funded higher than its level of needs. But in any case, our argument is that that would be a good thing to do as a way to then inform a longer term debate about reform. Is that something that you would support?
Yes, I think, as you say, the politics of it for the UK government is difficult for the reason, particularly that you describe in terms of the situation in Scotland. But I do think that the more information and data that we have, the better we can make good decisions and well-informed decisions. And having that more in-depth look across the UK in terms of need, then I think would be useful in doing that, and also in informing where the next steps might go should there be a reform of the Barnett formula.
Yeah.
And the Barnett formula and our fiscal framework overall has to be reviewed at points, and I think that to review it from a perspective of being well informed, I think would obviously have benefits.
Okay, great. Glad to hear your agreement on that point. Okay, great. So, I mean, we've started to talk already about the relationship, the state of the relationship between Welsh government and Westminster. So, I was just interested, what's been your own personal experience of engaging with, cooperating with, negotiating with your counterparts in the UK government?
Overall, I would say frustrating, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been able to work constructively in ways when it's been important to do so as well. So before the pandemic, we've established the finance quadrilaterals. So that's when all the three finance ministers of the devolved administrations meet with the chief secretary to the Treasury, and those meetings happened very infrequently before the pandemic. But actually, through the pandemic, they have, or certainly until the end of last autumn, had quite a good rhythm. So that was very good to have those regular opportunities to press our particular cases to the Chief Secretary. And although there will be some specific things which are different across the devolved administrations, actually, for the large part, we shared the same concerns and the same needs. So those meetings were really useful. And I'll give you one really good example, and that was in terms of how we had additional funding in respect of COVID. So right at the start of the pandemic, the UK government would make an announcement about additional funding for social care, for example, and then officials in devolved administrations would be poring over the detail, speaking to officials in Treasury, finding out if it's new money, if all of it's new money, if none of it is, and that could take a few days before we were able to fully understand the situation and any funding we would receive as a consequence, and then be in a position to make our decisions. And obviously, in the course of the pandemic, there's been pressure to make very quick announcements on things as soon as the UK government has done so. So at the start, that really wasn't a satisfactory way to operate. So we made the case then to Treasury that we should have what we called the COVID guarantee in terms of funding. So that would mean that the Treasury would guarantee us, and in the first instance, it was around £2 billion for Wales, that we could deploy for COVID purposes in advance of announcements being made across the border in England. And that was really useful. So that was, I think, something which was positive in terms of the relationships which we've had. And I always want to look for the positives where we can find them. In other ways, it has been more frustrating. So the flexibility arguments haven't really gained any traction. There are some ongoing issues that we're having with the UK government, which we're not able to resolve at the moment. One, for example, would be coal tip remediation. Now, this is a really big issue for us here in Wales. We have 40% of all of the UK's coal tips here in Wales. And after the flooding, not this February now, but the previous February, a big piece of work was undertaken to explore what work needed to be undertaken to make those coal tips safe for the future, and a huge remediation piece of work has to happen, and that will cost around £500 million over the course of 10 years. So we would make the case that there's a strong argument that that should be funded outside of the Barnett formula, because it's a legacy issue which impacts upon Wales more greatly than elsewhere. But the UK government is not agreeing to any of that and says, look, that this is your issue, you need to deal with it. So those issues, I think, are still ongoing, yet to be resolved, and I don't know how hopeful I am that we will come to a good resolution, but it's still something that we're pursuing at the moment. So those are areas which are more tricky, but we always try and come to the table in a constructive way and try and make our case as best we can.
Okay, yeah, and so in terms of the sort of systems and structures for intergovernmental relations that you have referred to, there were a couple of quite interesting publications I mentioned a moment ago that came out just yesterday. So I'm just quite interested in what you make of. Oh, sorry, don't joke on live on air with us, please, Rebecca. So my question being, so yeah, we saw published yesterday something called the Dunlop Review, written by former Scotland Officer Andrew Dunlop, which makes the case for Whitehall to develop a sort of stronger strategic centre to manage devolution and the union as a whole. There was also publication of some proposals for how to strengthen the systems for intergovernmental cooperation and dispute resolution and so on, although interestingly, rather like the old draft Brexit agreements, many parts of that document were placed in square brackets, indicating that not all the governments were yet agreed on what should happen. And then there was also some guidance published that was in the news a bit on which flags should be flown on UK government buildings, including a very specific requirement that if 2 flags are ever flown, the Union flag must always be flown in the superior position, I quote from the government announcement. And I did just think that the contrast between these different announcements all on the same day was quite interesting. My question is really just, I mean, what do you make overall of the UK government's approach to this? What is its union strategy and its approach to working with the devolved governments?
Well, it's completely baffling. I'll give them that. I mean, if the UK government thinks that their answer to a strong future for the UK is just to fly flags, then I think that they're probably not reading the room based on what you've said earlier about the polls which we've seen recently. So that it just doesn't feel like a strategy for for a strong UK. Neither does what they've been doing with the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund, seeking to circumvent devolution and circumvent the established democratic process that we have here in Wales for making decisions for things that are devolved to us here in Wales. So I think that they just feel very, very out of touch at the moment in terms of their approach to the future of the UK.
Okay, and on specifically on the intergovernmental relations review, I just wondered if there's any light you could shed on what are the areas of disagreement, because as some people watching might be aware, I mean, this has been an area where for many years there's been all sorts of reviews and reports, including some by us at the IFG, actually saying that we need a better, more systematic system for managing relations between the 4 governments of the UK. And what was published yesterday, from my quick read through it earlier, is actually quite impressive. I mean, there are plans for a whole set of new committees in different policy areas, a new, more transparent approach to resolving disputes when they arise, and various other things. But there are some parts of it, as I said, where agreement hasn't yet been reached. So what, as I say, are the main points of disagreement still?
Now, as you say, there have been some areas of real progress, particularly in terms of dispute avoidance and resolution in areas outside of finance. But from a finance perspective, it really is about getting the balance right in terms of the relationships for the future. And we don't feel like we've got that far yet. One of the particular issues, again, is about that dispute resolution. So we still don't have a feasible proposal of something that we would consider to be fair. And there are times in the recent years when we would have wanted to use some kind of system like that. An example would be that the statement of funding policy says, as you know, that if it's a decision's taken in one part of the United Kingdom, so if the UK government takes a decision on something which is devolved, but it has impacts on our finances, then it needs to make a funding transfer as a result of that. But this hasn't happened in the example of teachers' pensions, for example. The teachers' pensions were increased, had a knock-on impact to our budget, but the funding didn't come across from the UK government. So that's one particular area. And then there are other areas where we would really seek to lodge a dispute. The example of the way in which rail funding has been considered in the spending review. So currently we have a comparability factor of 36.6% with DfT, and that's because of the way in which the UK government has not included HS2 and Network Rail in terms of its considerations, despite the fact that we've had the core value lines devolved to us in Wales. Now that factor was previously over 80%. So you can see that there's a significant fall in our funding there as a result. So again, that's something that we would have liked to have taken to an independent adjudicator to get some kind of resolution on. But at the moment, all we can do is say to UK Treasury that we're not happy and try and work with them reasonably.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, essentially, as you say, it comes down to is HS2 categorized as a project for England and Wales, or just for England. If it were categorised as just for England, then Wales would get additional money based on the population share, as Scotland and Northern Ireland do. But because of the fact that in rail networks are not fully devolved to Wales, this is the effect on the budget. If anyone's interested in a particular case and the slightly technical aspects of the Barnett formula, please do read our report on this, funding devolution, that I mentioned before, because it is quite a complicated area. But it's one where I know the Welsh government has some, I think, quite legitimate questions to ask of the Treasury. Okay, great. I want to bring in some questions from the audience. We've had a few through. Thank you to people who've submitted. So let us start with a question from Mark, which is, what lessons has the Welsh government learnt from COVID, and what specific changes will you bring in around the management of public services going forward?
I think that COVID has, challenged all of us in so many ways, but particularly, obviously, been a huge challenge for public services. In terms of what we've learned, I think that we've learned that we do things better when we do them in collaboration and in partnership. That's been, I think, one of the standout successes, and one of the standout matters of our response to the pandemic has been the way in which, at every step of the way, we've taken all of the decisions in terms of responding to the pandemic in ways which have listened to our social partners and in ways which have worked very closely with public services. And a really, I think, important example is our approach to the contact tracing. So across the border in England, there are all kinds of allegations being made about cronyism, about horrendous waste of public money. But in Wales, we took a different approach, and we've introduced it as a public service. So when people are called about a contact that they've had with somebody with coronavirus, then they'll be called by someone who either works for the council or the health board, who's a public servant, usually located in their own local community as well. And as a result of that, I think the level of trust between that person and the person on the end of the phone is higher, and we found that people have been more willing in Wales to provide the information needed for contact tracing, and as a result, our contact tracing figures are very good. So I think that's something that we've learned here, is that actually doing things through public services. I don't know if we needed to learn this lesson, because it's what it was. It speaks to the heart really of our approach, but it vindicated really our approach of taking a public service model to the response to the public health crisis.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, another question then, also referring to coronavirus effects. This is from Lisa Haley Jones. So this is a kind of more political question. It says, as someone who lives in North Wales, how are you going to convince me to vote for Labour in the May elections, especially given the consequences of the harsh lockdown?
Well, it has been a harsh lockdown for all of us. We're all really feeling it in terms of not seeing family and friends for so long. I hope that people do recognise that when we have taken really difficult decisions, that we've done so on the basis of the scientific evidence presented to us, and we've been faithful to that evidence all along. We can't pick and choose which parts of it we listen to, and as a result, we do end up taking really difficult decisions. I don't think any of us, certainly in my party, came into politics to take people's liberties away and to restrict the things that they can do. But I hope that people realise and accept that we've done so in a way which has been based on trying to save as many lives as we possibly can, and livelihoods. In terms of North Wales, I think that some of the particular things that you'd be interested in would be the new North Wales Medical School, which we're seeking to introduce. That's one of our top pledges, because we know that we need to continue investing in the NHS in Wales, and having people trained in North Wales and with hopefully then to stay in North Wales for their career in medicine, I think will be a really good next step in terms of support for the NHS. So that's something in particular that we're very, very keen to deliver. And also in North Wales, taking forward that vision of North Wales as the kind of energy breadbasket, if I'm not mixing up too many metaphors in that particular one, for green energy for the future, I think will be really important, as well as putting North Wales, or continuing to put North Wales on the map for things such as advanced manufacturing and so on. So I think that there's lots and lots to be proud of in North Wales. I'm only sorry it's been so long since we've been able to go anywhere, and I do miss North Wales.
Okay, well, here's a question about South Wales for you then. So this is from Paul Hayes from Turner and Townsend, and he asks, what are the main sectors within Wales, specifically South Wales, that you would look to target in order to rebuild the economy?
We have some really strategically important sectors here in Wales, and in South Wales. I would be thinking about the steel industry, for example. That's going to be, extremely important for our recovery and for our future, as our economic future as a nation. So that's one of the sectors which I think that we need to be looking to continue to support. It's one of the sectors which the UK government has unfortunately consistently failed to support, but steel is incredibly important and at the top of our agenda, as is the aviation industry. So we've got our support for Cardiff Airport and all of those jobs which it supports in the vicinity. And of course, up in North Wales, we have Airbus. So that again is a sector which the UK government hasn't sought to support, but which is really important for us in terms of connectivity, but then also in terms of those well-paid skilled jobs that we want to be nurturing and increasing the numbers of here in Wales. So those two particular sectors will be important, as will manufacturing generally. So my colleague, the Minister for Economy, has recently published a manufacturing plan, which will seek to corral all of our efforts really in terms of supporting our existing manufacturing base in Wales, especially in the context of all the challenges of Brexit and so on. But then also trying to grow that sector as well, looking at what we can do in terms of import substitution, for example. So lots of opportunities there for the future, I think. But always really with a strong focus on skills and employability. And then the last sector, which I think is really important to mention, is the cyber sector. And again, this is something which Wales is really putting itself on the map on. Using to put itself on the map is our expertise that we're rapidly developing in terms of cybersecurity. So I think that that's a sector to be watching for the future as well.
Okay, great. And I want to follow up on this discussion with just one more question from me, actually, which is about the UK government's approach to trying to stimulate economic growth and rebuild communities and so on. You referred to this in passing before. The government has recently announced its plans for the Levelling Up Fund, which will operate all across the UK and try and divert money to places and people in need as part of economic rebuilding. There's going to be a shared prosperity fund to replace EU structural funding. There are other things as well, other signs as well of the UK government wanting to take a much more active role in encouraging and stimulating economic growth and infrastructure development and so on all across the UK. So you've described that as an astonishing assault on devolution. I think that was a quote from the news recently. I suppose my question to you is, do you think it actually matters or should matter to Welsh voters and communities whether they're getting money and investment from Westminster as opposed to from Cardiff? Why is it intrinsically a problem?
It should matter for a number of reasons. First being that the power to take decisions in this area in terms of regional development is very much within the context of the devolution settlement. So it should worry people that the people who have been elected to take decisions in these areas and scrutinise decisions in these areas are being bypassed as a result. But I know that constitutional arguments don't get you very, very far with lots of people. So there are other reasons why people should be worried, one of which is the financial impact on us and the ways in which the Welsh Government's budget, and I think the amount which the UK Government intends to spend in this area, has been diminished as a result. So in a normal year, had we been members of the European Union, we would be receiving £375 million from the European Union for regional development and structural funds and so forth. But in terms of what the UK Government is suggesting through the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund, we could be looking at only between £30 and £50 million as a result of that. So that in itself, I think, should get people angry in terms of what's happening through the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, which, despite its name, I think appears to be incapable of doing anything like that.
Okay, thanks. Great. Well, that is also an issue where we at the Institute for Government are hoping to publish something over the coming months, and we're keen to engage with you on that as we take that forward. So we are now at 12:45. We did have another few questions come in, but I'm afraid, with apologies to those who submitted them, we're going to have to call the conversation to a halt now. But Rebecca, thanks so much for taking part. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity as well. And,
I have, thank you.
Great, yeah, and thank you to everyone who tuned in, and please look out for our upcoming events over the coming weeks on other aspects of devolution to Wales and Scotland as well. Thanks very much.